just give me a notice after 20 minutes if I talk too much. You've already heard me today. I think
It's very important.
give
to
enough space to
Don't worry.
someone else. In any case, I think a good way of getting into the subject of what I call the Zionist mindset is to read the diaries of the Zionist early settlers. There were two groups of early settlers of Zionism. The first, who came in the late 19th century, were more classical colonialist type of settlers. Like colonialists elsewhere in the world, they came to exploit the resources of the land, including the human resources of the land, in order to make better life for them compared to the countries of origin. And colonialists, white settlers, all over the world, the same period, and definitely before that period, were building similar models for exploitation and oppression of the local indigenous people for their own sake. However, they were not the people that created the Zionist movement in Palestine. The people who really molded, really formulated Zionism the way we know it, came in what historians like to call the second wave of Zionist settlement. Or in Hebrew they call it Aliyah Shniya, the second ascendance. They came after 1905, after the failure of the first attempt of the Bolshevik movement to topple the Tsarist regime in Russia. And many of them were revolutionaries at heart, who believed up to 1905 that the international revolution would provide a solution to what they called the Jewish problem in Eastern Europe. But the failure of that revolution, or that coup, has moved them into the direction of nationalism. And they were very poor compared to the early settlers, the second wave, very poor, and had very little money on them when they arrived in the port of Jaffa. They knew nothing about how farming and agriculture, because as you know, Jews in Russia and Eastern Europe were not allowed to work on cultivation of land, and had nowhere to stay, and didn't know how to make a living for themselves in the new country called Palestine. So they were very lucky that the local Palestinians hosted them, offered them a place to sleep, a little bit of food, and when they stayed long enough, also taught them how to cultivate the land and how to shepherd the herds and how to become sort of children of the new country. But at night, these settlers, under the candlelight, wrote diaries. They were obsessive diarists. They wrote a lot of, every day they wrote in a diary, which is good for the historian. They wrote about everything. A mosquito bite, didn't sleep well, a lot about the women they didn't like, the women didn't like the men didn't like the men. But there's nothing that escaped the diary. And in those diaries, in those entries to the diaries, they write about their greatest disappointment to be in Palestine. The main disappointment was that the place was full of foreigners. Especially those, of course, who hosted them. They were the main foreigners. And they were saying in their diaries, and I'm staying tonight in the house of one of these foreigners. And you have to understand this mindset. The mindset is, and hasn't changed, It hasn't changed. There were two disappointments here, to a certain extent. One was that most of them believed the propaganda that Palestine was an empty space, that it was a land without people, waiting for people without it. They really believed it. If you read the propaganda of the Zionist movement after Herzl founded it properly in 1897, Palestine appears as a totally empty land. It's amazing. So they were really, really surprised to see someone else there. Secondly, they had to square this new effect with their idea of creating a new homeland. So they decided if someone was there and was not supposed to be there, they were aliens, hostile aliens, in fact, who usurped, took over something which did not belong to them.